Let's go. Maybe, might just take it. Chance of fortune, it'll waiting. Live and shit go crazy. Level up my ice up. Maybe, might just take it. Chance of fortune, it'll waiting. Live and shit go crazy. Level up my ice updated. Water implicated. What we striving for, we made it. Your good playlist, I'm replaying. Maybe, might just take it. Chance of fortune, it'll waiting. Live and shit go crazy, level up my ice updated. Water implicated, what we striving for, we made it. Your good playlist, I'm replaying.
Dom Paris, back in the mix with it, man. In this video, I'm going to cover tracking with effects on an input section, specifically tracking vocals. If you've downloaded a tracking template from me before, you would have noticed that there's an input section with effects on it. In FL Studio, I usually have it tucked away here in the right drawer. And this is a pretty standard practice in the recording world, but I've received probably 100 different comments between Patreon email and the comment section asking for further explanation as to exactly how this works, why you would decide to record vocals this way, and what benefits it offers you in the recording and mixing process as a whole. Basically, I just use some light effects to get my vocals into a general ballpark of intelligibility, dynamics control, and tonal characteristics before it gets sent into pitch correction. So I'm just going to be explaining how it works and the approach I take and the use I make of it in my workflow, and my justifications for why I choose to work this way against the status quo. So buckle up, because this is going to be a long one.
All the flow straight coming out the top like Top Gun.
So pretty much anywhere you go or ask online, most people are going to suggest that unless you're recording through hardware, you should record your signal into your DAW dry, right? If you're mixing in the box and there's nothing else on your signal other than digital plugins, then there's no good reason that your signal should be anything other than bone dry. So this is the general school of thought that most people come from in regards to effects while recording. And I concur this in most cases. You're recording a bass guitar, right? Or an electric. Even if you're capturing a hardware amp and cab, any experienced engineer is going to grab as well a clean DIN, because it makes no sense to commit to a sound now you have no idea what the final song, the final mix is going to sound like, you know? What if you change your mind? What if once you hear the entire mix in context, you now decided that the tone of this guitar amp now stacked on top of itself 3 times is just a bit too abrasive in the mix? What if you get an executive command, an executive order down from the top that something needs to be changed? You're screwed. You've effectively ruined an otherwise perfect take for no reason other than the fact that you wanted to record post-effects. So there are definitely certain scenarios where I would tend to steer away from printing effects onto my signal as I'm recording it. If I'm dealing with a particularly technical or arduous performance, I wouldn't want to ruin a take with printed effects. If I'm not very familiar with the source material, with the actual source of whatever sound I'm capturing, I wouldn't want to print something onto it that I don't know how it's going to translate into a mix later. And any large, drastic changes to the source content or any creative effects, creative decisions, especially ones that affect the overall integrity of the stereo field as well as the phase alignment, along with the decay envelope of your signal. So this goes for like choruses, flangers, most things that get attached to an LFO, reverbs, decays, distortions, plenty of things fall into this category. Generally, I will refrain from printing anything like that onto a signal as it's being captured. And on top of these setbacks, there's also the issue of input latency as you're recording. A lot of plugins this won't really be an issue for, but there are certain ones that utilize like oversampling or have some type of a look-ahead feature that can cause a noticeable or even unrecordable amount of latency. And as a result of this, there is the potential to possibly ruin a take, more specifically when an artist is having trouble keeping time the track because of the latency. So those are the major drawbacks that you get from printing effects onto a signal as you're recording it. However, there's quite a few benefits that, depending on the circumstances you're recording under, that you can exploit or take advantage of, given that you understand what happens byproduct as a consequence. So I would say the number one perquisite that I receive by printing effects onto my vocals as I record them is that on projects with a bunch of vocal tracks, there's more CPU headroom so I can have enough effects sitting on the vocal channels in serial in real time, which makes it better for the performer as well as for speeding up the workflow when you're mixing. And I'm not talking about absolutely nuking your vocals with compression or high shelf boosting 10K by 9 dB or something ridiculous like that. But there are certain things, especially in rap and hip hop, that I know for a fact I'm going to do the exact same on all of my vocals in the exact same spot in the chain. And I'm not saying that I'm using the same settings and plugins on every single project, but just that within this session, all the vocal tracks up to a certain stage at least will be treated with the same processing. My mic emulation will be the same on every vocal. My preamp will remain the same on every vocal. If I'm using a de-esser, I'll probably have the same settings on each vocal, at least on a per singer basis. All the presets I make are calibrated at negative 14 dB, so I know that my peak calibration is going to be the same on every vocal. I want them coming out about the same volume before serious, heavy processing. I also like putting my preparatory effects before autotune just because it has a little bit easier job if it's not working to follow a vocal all over the place in dynamics and sibilancy. So the effects I know I'm going to be putting in the chain before autotune are usually a safe bet for things you can print. But pitch correction is actually something that I really don't recommend printing onto a vocal just for the reason that it can very easily ruin or mess up vocal takes. And it's also going to be like the number one main thing that's changing the sound of the vocal. It's the primary plugin, in my opinion, responsible for the vibe of the vocal. And I just wouldn't want to commit something that integral, that fundamental, that constituent, and that could very easily need to be decided to be changed later on in the project. It's just that's a freedom that I wouldn't want to forego. But yeah, freeing up system resources is the name of the game. Say I have like a project with 8 different vocal channels that I have rendering in real time. If I have 5 effects in my input section, 8 times 5, that's 40. So that's 40 slots that are freed up in the plugin chain, as well as 40 plugins worth of system resources that are now available to be used as well. I can't speak for anyone watching this, but I am primarily a mixing engineer. And if by some twist of fate I find myself tracking a session, chances are I'll be mixing it. And I am a devout disciple of the philosophy of making decisions in the present that will make things easier and less complicated for yourself in the future later down the line. So if there's something that you find yourself doing consistently on every single vocal, like stuff like low cut, 80 hertz, this can be a good tool to use to save yourself time and system resources in the future. Now you shouldn't just go put things on blindly, just use a preset that you got from me, just have it set up without checking anything before recording. But if you have a chance to listen to the artist perform a few times, and you can use your ears to dial in all the settings to a place where you and the artist both agree you like and sounds good, then maybe if you're experienced enough, you can consider printing that as you're recording. Also, in my opinion, one of the most important characteristics or traits to have as a mixing engineer is the ability to make decisions with intentionality. Not just boosting 80 hertz on a kick because you like to boost 80 hertz on a kick, but because it forms some purpose or function within the context of a song. Right, or something like pulling the bass back on certain parts of the song, like maybe in the bridge, so that it changes the emotional impact, emotional resonance that the track has with the listener. So if you're, taking time, using your ears, using the knowledge you have and experience you have, then making a decision that you can't undo or will take a lot of work to get to where you are again, in a way almost like inadvertently kind of develops this skill. It forces you in a way to pay more attention and to put more purpose in the decisions you're making right now, which helps you build good habits as an engineer, whether you be like a session engineer or a mixing engineer. There's also a certain emotional relief you get just from knowing that you can't go backwards at all in the track. I think it's, I don't really know how to explain it, but it's like your brain is now freed up to focus on the future and what you need to get done as opposed to what you could do differently or what you could have done, right? And you're saving yourself time in the mix by committing to a sound now. I know that concept probably just shook some of you guys. I know that can sound a bit scary or just unnecessary, but it's something that all the top mixing engineers in the world do just with hardware. So it can't be that dangerous if you know what you're doing with software. But I stress that you really need to take the time, have the time to dial in all your settings to where they need to be. If you have like a preset that you use on your voice, don't use that on someone else's voice. If you're recording a performance that is significantly more dynamic than things you're normally recording, go in and make sure that your compressors are controlling your dynamics in the way that is desired, not just doing something random that you have set up preset there. But yeah, so that's all the main assets and liabilities that come along with printing while tracking. So let's jump in. I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys what I use on my input channel as I'm tracking and the reasons behind it. And this is the same input section that I pretty much have on every template that I've released so far. If you don't have it though, I'll drop this generic template attached to this video. If you just want the input chain on the input channel, then I'm gonna have that on the $1 tier available as a Wave Studio Rack preset. But for those of you that are interested in actually having this entire template, that will be available on the $5 tier. So if you take a look over here on the right-hand drawer, I always keep my input recording channels, I guess you could say, right here. So there's the record channel, and then there's also some other goodies, stuff I like to use when I'm tracking. So I've got a metronome. I have my own custom metronome just because the one in FL, not only do I not like the sound of it, but it can be a bit intrusive. You can't control the volume. So I have this over here with a little bit of reverb on it, so it's not too, ear-piercing, headphone bleeding as you're recording. And then there's also a talkback channel. I know most of you guys are just gonna be recording yourselves, but if you are recording for someone else and they're in another room, then you can talk to them through this channel. It's sidechained to, I think, the master, so whenever the beat is playing, it automatically cuts your voice out, so you're not gonna be interrupting the performance. It might be sidechained to the main vocal. I don't know, it's sidechained to one of the mains, so anytime there's an important signal coming through, you're not, just contributing to the noise pollution. And here is the spice. The spice melange. All right, so here's what and why I put on my input channel, so that if you want to take this knowledge and apply it to your own workflow, your own style, you can. All right, so I've got a series of EQ here, just gently giving my overall vocal shape. As you can see, I'm cutting off some of the lows, as well as just doing some gentle, slight pushing, nothing more than, a dB or two. And this is something you're gonna wanna check and change on a per singer basis. Every single voice that comes in is gonna be different. So this setting I have here for my voice will not have the same effect on someone else's voice, right? The resonances that exist and are created in my booth are not gonna be the same in whatever environment you're recording in. I'm usually recording on a Slate, the VMS1, but unless you're recording on that microphone as well, then you're gonna need a different EQ curve to get your vocal to where you want it, as opposed to the one I'm using on mine. So you might need a slightly different curve in order to get the best sound out of whatever system you're recording on. But yeah, we got the red EQ and then just the fruity parametric built-in stock EQ. Just because I like the sound of the red EQ, and these are both some pretty low CPU utilization and low latency plugins. That's one thing about this input chain. All of the plugin choices that I have selected here are all super low latency. This template is oriented towards tracking, so latency is at the forefront of my decision making with all these choices. But yeah, check out here what I got going on with the red EQ. Nothing too crazy. You can copy these settings into any EQ plugin that you choose. And boom, got the red 3 compressor. I have a Focusrite 18i20 here in the studio. So I like to use Focusrite plugins. I got them for free. They sound great. But yeah, you get the idea. So what I have this doing, I have this set to the fastest settings I can possibly set it to. And the threshold is at -10. So I like to record with aiming for peaking levels around -14 dB. 14 decibels of headroom is a decent amount. It's probably gonna be more than the dynamic range of most, a good amount of performances. So I'm not ever gonna lose any data from digital clipping going in, just because I'm shooting for such a low target. If I ever see the red light pop up my interface, which I do keep an eye on as I'm recording, but if I ever see that pop up during a take, just automatically let the singer know I'm just gonna be popping back in, punching in for another take. Hell, if I see the yellow light, I'm probably punching back in for another take. I just don't wanna risk it. But yeah, so this compressor here, the red 3 compressor, is just keeping the vocal in a general ballpark range of that -14 dB. If there's ever a peak that comes in a little too hot, comes in, -4, -5, it'll just, it'll just grab it, kind of bite down, to just keep the signal within a certain level. And this also helps it not to drive what's coming up next in the dynamics section too hard. And this generally stays the same regardless of who or what or where or when I'm recording. Next up is the dynamics section. So I've got an instance of virtual mix rack here. If you guys watch the channel, you know this is one of my favorite plugins. Slate Digital is one of my favorite plugin manufacturers, but this specifically is one of my favorite plugins. It gets used in almost every single project I work on, and not just vocals, but plenty of other things as well. I'm not gonna go into too much detail here explaining this because it's pretty simple, it's pretty rudimentary, and most of you guys, I'm more of an intermediate channel, not really a beginner level channel, so most of you guys I feel like should be able to just look at, the settings on the plugin and be able to tell what's going on. But in case anyone might be interested, I will also make this specific virtual mix rack preset available for download under the $1 tier on Patreon as well. Yeah, I guess I'll explain it real quick. So it's just microphone emulation, preamp emulation. I have a de-esser, then a gate. There's an SSL EQ, just scooping out some mid-range mudge and rolling off some of the lows. Right before it goes into some gentle compression, just shaping the overall envelope of the vocal so it's a little bit more controlled. And then at the end, I have a 6 dB boost just to bring it up to a little bit more of an operative level. Now keep in mind, if you are going into more plugins again after this, which I am assuming you are, I would hope you are, you're gonna need to bring your vocals, gain stage them back down before they hit the next stage of plugins to 14 dB, because plugins are calibrated at 14 dB. That's the optimal peak level. And it's not the end of the world, but if your vocals are coming in too hot, you're just setting yourself up for aliasing issues, oversampling issues. I would imagine that most people that stumble upon this video casually have no clue what aliasing artifacts are and how to identify them in a mix, what problems they cause. So you'd just be blindly making your sound worse for no apparent reason. You're just setting yourself up for failure, So I would very highly recommend that you, at the whatever next channel your vocals are hitting, just the first plugin you throw on, gain stage back down negative 14 dB. Don't think about it, and at the end of the chain, gain stage back up to whatever operative level you want for your track. So yeah, that's the input effects portion of this in a nutshell. But some of you guys have not completely understood, even though I've explained before, don't entirely understand how to use this template with the auto-tune and the other channels, so I'm gonna explain that real quick. So you can only have one voice coming through an auto-tune at any given time. So this is problematic if you have parts in your track where you want to have stacks, you want to have 3 voices coming at the same time, you have ad-libs coming in behind a voice at the same time, you have harmonies, or if there's only one voice to the whole song but you want different auto-tune settings on different parts, like maybe the auto-tune drops back a bit in the verse and comes harder in the chorus, or you want different channels to have different combinations and variations of send effects, like one with a little more reverb and one with a little more delay, something like that. You can do all of that here in real time. So I have set up off the rip 5 different channels. You can manipulate them to your desire. You can set the levels, pans, sends, all that individually on each channel, so you can have different sounding voxes here in real time as you're recording. And for those of you that were wondering why these channels were called print, is because if you're mixing vocals with this template as well, once I've locked in a sound that I'm comfortable with and I know I can step forward and progress with the rest of the mix, I'll print the effects that are on the channels on the vocals here and then move them over to the next section on the left, which are my vocal mains. And this is where I take care of further processing, so all my automation moves I'm doing from the mains. I'm usually not printing anything, creative, like reverbs, delays, modulations, bit crushers, distortions, none of that I'm generally printing, just getting all the vocals to a good working area for the rest of the mix here with the effects I put on my vocal in serial. Another note, if you're printing a channel, make sure you turn off all the sends, or you mute them, or you turn them all down to 0, because those will get printed onto it. If you have some reverb in there, or if you have some, any of the send effect, the bus effects, those will get printed onto it if you consolidate at least in FL Studio. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the overview of the template. So I mean, you know, I also got over here my master processing. Now this is the real juice. If you've watched my videos before, you know this is where the true sauce is. I know there will be a video on master processing coming out soon. Now, just to be very clear, this is not a mastering job. This is far from mastering job. It's just the preset I use when I'm cranking out demos, just get things up to loudness standards, get the track pumping and grooving a little bit. But yeah, that's the video, man. So if you guys enjoyed it or if you learned something, be sure to leave a like or a comment if you have any questions as anything I can answer. I'll try to respond to as many as I can. Go ahead and throw the Patreon up. You already know the drill. It's just $1, folks. You can get access to all the presets I use in my videos. This input chain, I'll say it again, is gonna be a Waves Studio Rack preset available on the $1 tier. But if you want access to the entire template I use in this video, you're gonna have to bump up to the $5 tier. I hope I could teach y'all boys something today. And I'm out.
Stay up, came up, calm down, stay up, sundown. I ain't need no label car, keep it thumping. Steady dropping hits, rolling like them Russian. Steady with the AK, know I keep it rushing, damn. Private island, spend the weekend out in France.